Hello and welcome to a Diverse Life podcast. This is podcast number 2 with myself, Ian Pringle, and Richard. Hello, Richard.
Hello.
Hello. So Richard's there as well. And Richard and I were talking and thinking about what should we do this program about. And one of the things that came up for us was this sense of awkwardness around disability, around how to approach somebody with a disability and how to talk about that and interact. So our question really to tee up the show today is, in 2019, do people still feel awkward about disability? Do they still stare or have an uncomfortable reaction? So Richard, you're the expert on this. You're the one with all the experiences. So tell us about your experiences.
I think largely people still do, but they almost feel guilty that they have that sort of awkward reaction, or they're not quite sure, exactly how to interact or how to ask a question. It's that sort of comfortable thing. We're still not comfortable with asking questions about a disability or sort of reacting to it. I think it's important to sort of position it in that sense that we all, if we see something that is out of the norm then, or that we're not expecting, we do all sort of stare, or we might just have a sort of cursory glance at something that is perhaps not what we were expecting to sort of see. And it's important to sort of realise that that's perfectly natural for that to happen, but there is definitely still an awkwardness around disability and sort of engaging with people. That sort of cursory glance can go from you're just having a quick look because you perhaps weren't expecting this, to actually now you're sort of bordering on being rude because it's now turned into a stare.
And so you, as somebody who's sometimes in a wheelchair, I guess that's when you get those reactions most. What would you, accepting what you're saying, that actually that's a kind of a human reaction when we see something different that we're not used to, we tend to react in that slightly awkward way. What would you like people to do?
I mean, I think, once you've sort of accepted that people are going to sort of, have that awkwardness and an uncomfortable thing, for me, it's just sort of think about the impact of what you're doing. So if your cursory glance does turn into a bit of a stare, or you're creating an uncomfortable environment, just think about the impact that might have on the individual. So if it's somebody who is perhaps anxious about going out in public or being in an environment that they're not familiar with, that sort of staring and that awkwardness could actually have a real impact on somebody's confidence to go out and to do sort of normal day-to-day activities. So it's just that sort of, accept that, our brain is, as you've said before, a sort of pattern-making machine. So when we see something that doesn't fit what we're expecting, it's understandable that there'll be that different reaction. But just try and be mindful that actually, if you are staring or you're making somebody feel uncomfortable, whether it's a conscious thing or not, that can have a real impact on somebody's sort of confidence and their sort of willingness to go out and do things. And you don't want somebody to then become a recluse because they think, well, I don't want to go out if people are going to stare and it's going to be awkward.
What do you do, Richard? Because I mean, you always seem incredibly thick-skinned to me. I don't know if that's, I mean that in a positive way. But that obviously you've been a younger person. You've, like we all have, felt awkward about our bodies and the way we look and all those sort of things. And I'm assuming you've kind of got over that a bit because you go everywhere and you don't really care. But what did you have to do to overcome that? Because I know you still experience those stares and that awkwardness and all of those things. So what do you do for yourself to get through that?
I don't think you necessarily sort of completely get over it. There are times that no matter how much you're used to it and all the different experiences that you have, there are times when actually that awkwardness or that staring can be incredibly frustrating. I think for me, I've almost had to sort of develop a coping mechanism whereby I have to just sort of either try and ignore it or just accept it as, it's probably not a deliberate thing. Or I almost have to use a sort of humorous approach towards it. Because if I sort of, every time, somebody said the wrong thing or stared or was awkward or rude about the disability or asked a really personal question, if I sort of took that personally and took that load onto my shoulders, I'm not sure I would go out as much as I do and interact with people and just be able to sort of carry on. So I think you either sort of have to accept that that's the way it is, and through the sort of training and the other work that I do, I kind of hope that I can educate more people on how to do this properly and how to engage with people. But I think you just have to kind of decide, I'm either going to get very upset about this all the time, or I'm going to have to almost develop some sort of coping mechanism just to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. And something about the work that you do has enabled you to rationalise that slightly, and through an understanding feel more able to cope with those awkward situations as they come along.
Yeah, and I think by and large, people don't. I always say, when I'm doing sort of diversity and inclusion training or disability awareness training, I don't believe the majority of people set out to intentionally be offensive or say the wrong thing. It's just because they aren't aware, they may not have had that life exposure to somebody with a disability. So a lot of the people I know, and I've known for a very long time, my friendship group and sort of social circle, if you like, have almost grown up with disability being part of their sort of day-to-day life because they've had that person in their life that has the disability. And I think that's empowered them to sort of look at it differently, so that when they see somebody else with a disability, they're kind of aware of how you might ask if somebody would like some assistance or some help, or they're very aware of how not to sort of dare and create that awkward environment. And that sort of translates through to their children. Some of my friends now have younger children, and children naturally are very curious, and at various times I've had sort of their younger children ask me, why do you use a walking stick? Why do you have special shoes and all those sort of things? But those children aren't trying to be rude. It's just a child's natural curiosity. And within that, of course, children say fantastic things, but they're also very clear and very blunt sometimes in what they say. But because the parents have had that exposure to a disability, and I've been around for a long time, they're able to sort of say, well, it's because of this, and they then feel comfortable to explain it to that child. Sometimes they will ring me and say, look, that my son or daughter is asking about your disability. How would you suggest I sort of communicate it to them? Because you can't do it in a sort of medical or technical way, because that's going to be far too complicated. And I think from this, people do feel awkward. I think what happens is that we don't educate children about disability. I can be in a shop or a supermarket, and a child will naturally sort of stare, or I'll hear the child sort of saying to the parent, why is that person using a wheelchair, or why is that person, walking the way that they do? And in the majority of cases, the parents will look horrified and sort of pull the child away, and then you can sort of hear them almost telling them off and saying, look, you mustn't dare, or you mustn't ask that. And for me, that's where we need to change. We need to say, look, people are different. There are different reasons. Maybe they just have trouble walking. Have that conversation instead of sort of making the child feel guilty.
I was going to ask you, so I can just interrupt now, Richard. So I was just going to ask you because you were making that really clear point actually about you made some really interesting points. One about people asking, well, actually, what is it I say to my children? Because they're not going to understand the medical model or the description of a particular disability. And also that thing of a parent chastising their child for saying something in what they perceive to be the wrong way, or maybe just feeling embarrassed based on their children's behaviour, can make it worse in the future, can't it? That can lead to a child having more of a issue with someone with a disability than they might have done before if they'd understood it. So I think my question really is, and I think I can hear parents out there screaming at the radio or screaming to whatever they're listening to, whether you're listening to this on your computer or your iPad or whatever, screaming and just saying, yeah, what is it I say then? How do I describe that? In what terms? So can you give some sort of quick bullet points, if you can, about that?
I think the important thing is to not sort of, tell the child off for asking questions. Curiosity, first of all, is a natural thing, and I think it should be encouraged. But I think when you have that conversation, it's just about saying, people are born different. There are different cultures, different religions, and within that, people do have sometimes difficulty with walking. There may be a reason why they need to have support, or they might need the use of a walking stick just to make their sort of day-to-day walking or mobility or whatever it might be easier. I know a lot of my friends have explained it to their children by saying, look, Richard was born 3 or 4 months early, so he just wasn't quite ready. And he just has trouble with his legs. He's a little bit stiff, and it just takes him longer to do it. And sometimes they can sort of relate that to an elderly relative or a grandparent and say, for example, like granddad will use a walking stick just to support him, but he can still move around and do those kind of things. And then you can sort of see the child just accepting that actually, okay, I'm okay with that now. And it just becomes normal. So if I spend time with my friends' children, and I have my own child now, those children sort of accept that if we want to go and do something, so if they want to go and play in the park, or we want to do something, they sort of just accept it might take a little bit longer. They maybe don't want to ask me if I want to go on the trampoline again, because we've had that conversation before about how that might not be practical. But what you'll see is the children are very good at using their imagination, so they will alter whatever activity it is that they want to do to be something that fits and something that's manageable. So, as an example, one of my nieces a few years ago wanted to play hide and seek. And she decided it took far too long for me to get up and walk around the house and try and find her. So she would do the counting herself, bury me under a pile of cushions, and then come and find me. So I didn't actually have to move, but she would create her own version of the game based on this is what I know can be done. So I think children are very good at sort of adapting to situations and taking information in. But it's just about, making them feel that it's okay to ask those questions and not worrying too much about how you answer it, but just sort of give examples and say, well, there are lots of different reasons why somebody might have that walking stick, they might have the wheelchair, or they might have the different shoes, whatever the situation is that the child has observed. And then just sort of giving it a little bit of context and saying, well, look, there are lots of different reasons that might happen. There are lots of different things that you might see, but it's perfectly natural and it is just part of life, and children will just accept that.
Okay, so there was some great stories there, Richard. And in essence, I think a lot of what you're saying is this is about spending more time with people with disabilities and with children, just really just trying to put things in basic terms, but being very accepting with them of disability and contextualizing that. That's something I heard you saying, putting that into context so they can understand it and then not worry about it.
Yeah, I think it's just giving them the confidence to think it's okay to ask questions, and then just answering them as honestly as you can. I wondered though, Ian, because you will have a slightly different sort of perspective or experience on it, because you and I have travelled a lot, to and from London and various other places delivering sort of training, and I just sort of wondered, obviously most of the time I'm in that wheelchair and you're sort of alongside, or we're travelling together. I just sort of wondered what your views or experiences were of how people react to us when we turn up and I have that disability.
Yeah, and it's I think it's a funny one. I have to be honest that when I first started working with you, I was a bit unsure about it all. I kind of thought, oh right, and I knew that someone with a disability that's delivering training around diversity, this is perfect. This is exactly the person that I need to be working with and learning about these things. But at the same time, I did have my own concerns about what am I going to be required to do, and is it okay for me just to help Richard? Should I be offering him help with this and that? And I think I had to overcome some just personal awkwardnesses and fears. And I think on reflection and listening to what you were just saying, some of that is about the fact that I've not personally experienced being with somebody with a disability very much. Certainly not as a colleague, not as I have worked with people with disabilities, but that's sometimes different because you've got your working mask on, if you want. You're kind of in your working mode, which is different to just kind of working together with someone or friendship. And I think we've built a friendship, but initially I was like, oh, I'm not quite sure what to do. And I think what happened for me was I began to very quickly learn that um, I'd made the decision. I'm not going to keep offering things because I'm not sure if that's really annoying. And Richard's like, well, actually, I don't need you to do that, Ian, and stop asking me this. So I kind of made a point of stepping back initially and allowing you to just say, can you do that and can you grab that? And what I realised quite quickly was that, yeah, Richard's really happy to just say, Ian, would you mind passing me that, or could you go and get that, or I need this. And then for me, that was just a complete eye opener because it made it a much easier communication, knowing that I was meeting your needs because you were telling me what your needs were rather than me trying to guess what they were, which was just going to be messy. So that was the first sort of part for me. And then I think what I noticed more and more, and was quite difficult to cope with, was that as we were going around our daily lives, getting on trains, getting off trains, walking through stations, so many people would, I saw the kind of the staring that you deal with on a day-to-day basis, but then also they would look up at me. So sometimes literally just walking through a station and passing somebody by who would look down at you and then stare up at me and smile in that kind of way where it's like, oh, they think that I'm your carer or something like that. And it's really annoying because you just think, well, what are you doing? You're making assumptions, and it makes me feel awkward because I know, in actual fact, right now I'm working with Richard and it's his business and he's in charge. And so, it's that stuff. And then the kind of interactions at train stations. So, go and get a ticket. People will, not all the time, but sometimes people will very much direct the information towards me. And I remember particularly on one occasion when, I think you were getting the train home and I wasn't. And I'd assisted you just to get through the train station with your wheelchair. And then I was going off somewhere else. And the assistance team at that particular railway immediately started asking me about things. Oh, what train you're getting, where you're going? And I was like, ask him. It's not. I don't actually know because I'm not getting the train. And I think that could get really difficult. I think if people don't do that. So that's my experiences. But I very much feel that if by being with you, with somebody with a disability and working with that, it's totally opened my eyes and my perspective about that more diverse life, I think, and embracing that. And I think sometimes what stops me from embracing that is a fear that I might get it wrong. But now I know that actually the responsibility is for the person with the disability to inform as well as for me to ask. So it's a two-way thing, and I feel like sometimes I should have all the answers, and that's not possible.
I think the fear is the biggest thing. So whenever I talk to companies or individuals about doing any kind of disability awareness work, it's the fear of getting it wrong. But I think we have to, nobody's perfect. We all get things wrong. Even I get things wrong.
Hardly ever, though, Richard.
But also, hardly ever, yeah. But also, I don't expect people to get it right all of the time. I'm aware that people don't know what language or terminology to use. I'm aware that this might be the first time they've had sort of one-to-one experience with a person that's had a disability, and therefore they're not sure. I'm not sure in some circumstances, or when I meet people with different needs or different experiences, sometimes even I'm not sure and 100% confident on is what I'm about to do the best way of doing it. And I think for me that comes back to an education piece, and it needs to start sort of in schools. We need to sort of look at educating and inspiring the next generation to be a bit more comfortable, and perhaps look at spending more time with people that have disabilities, and in our next podcast episode, one of the things that we're going to do is talk to a young person who has a disability, but they also work as a teaching assistant in schools. So I'm quite looking forward to sort of hearing their experiences and how the children in that school have adapted to him and his circumstances, but also how the school, from an employment perspective, have been able to sort of support and make that job possible as well. So I think that's going to be a really interesting episode to listen to.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to speaking to it's Oliver, and yeah, we're going to have him on the show next time. So that's the end of the podcast for today. I hope you've enjoyed listening to it. That was A Diverse Life with me, Ian Pringle, and Richard Shakespeare.
Goodbye.
And yeah, we'll be back for our third podcast in probably about a week's time. So I hope you like this one. Goodbye.